Welcome to the Knowledge Series, and the focus tonight is on kindness in the classroom. And maybe before we get to kindness in the classroom, we want to really bring our attention to what is happening and helping students really develop that skill of paying attention and knowing that they're paying attention. And then from there, how are we treating one another as well? So I'm Lori Gustafson. I'm an outreach specialist at the center, and I'm part of the education team. And I'd like to introduce a practice. I looked at my colleague and I went, we're going to talk a lot about mindfulness-based practices here. And I thought, why don't we start with one? And so how many of you have had a full day of work, of running around, of thinking about a lot of different things? So let's take a moment, okay? And so when we talk about mindfulness-based practices, we're really just bringing our attention to what is here right now. But it can really be helpful to pay attention to how we're sitting right now. And so maybe feeling your feet on the floor. And maybe we make some adjustments in the body to help us be a little bit more present. And then now, just, if it feels right, you can close the eyes or maybe just look down, a gentle gaze downward. And bringing your attention to sounds in the room. And now noticing how the body feels right now and how the chair is supporting the body. So noticing the points of contact that the body makes with the chair, feet with the floor. And now just bringing your attention to the breath and following the inhale from the beginning to the end and the exhale from the beginning to the end. And even if the mind wanders off into lots of thinking or trying to figure out, allow the attention of the breath to draw the attention back just for this moment. And this moment. And just noticing how it feels now. And then opening the eyes if they happen to have closed, and doing a quick check-in to see how does it feel right now. How does it feel in the body? How does it feel in the mind? So I'd like to introduce the panel for tonight. And two of my colleagues at the center, Matt Hirshberg and Lisa Thomas Prince, they're part of the education team. And Matt is a graduate student at the center. And he's going to be speaking about the research that's coming out of the center in regards to what we know, what we don't know, what we hope to find out. So the focus is on the 5th grade study, and I think he'll also talk about the pre-service teachers project, which he's overseeing. Lisa Thomas Prince is an outreach specialist at the center, and she has been at the center for quite a few years, and she has been involved in every education project there. So she brings a lot of experience to the panel discussion. Her work at the center is to design and implement the mindfulness-based training programs that are being researched. And then we have the Glendale team. So there's Sara Knueve, who has been in the Madison district for quite a while, social worker, and now she has a real focus at Glendale working on the positive behavior support, the social emotional learning curriculum, working with all students, all staff at the school. And Cassie Hoover, and she is a special education teacher, and she does a lot of teaming there at Glendale. And because of the work that we've been doing at Glendale and her involvement in taking a mindfulness-based stress reduction class, she's been integrating a lot of these practices in her own work with students and in her own life. And then Amber Fiene, classroom teacher at Glendale, and doing the same, bringing these practices into the classroom And I think what you might hear is that they bring the practices into their own lives first and then see what happens. So I'm really looking forward to the evening, and let's give them a round of applause just to start it off.
Thanks, Lori. So my name is Matt Hirshberg. I'm a graduate student at the center, and I work on the education team projects. So first, thank you for coming. And also, I just want to give a special thanks to donors. All of the work that we're going to talk about tonight has been either funded, partially funded, or the sort of pilot studies that went into then getting larger grants that fund the research was from donors. So thank you for that. And my task tonight is to try to give you an overview of the sort of framework and the theory behind the research in about 20 minutes. So we'll see if I can do that. So just a little bit about me. I said I'm a graduate student at the center, and my department is the Department of Educational Psychology. I'm a former teacher. I taught middle school before coming to graduate school. This is the school that I taught at. It's in a sort of well-to-do community north of Boston. I like to start off talks about the education work with this picture because I think it illustrates why this work is so important. So this was a district that was really well funded. Like all of the parents had college educations or higher. They really cared about their kids' educations. This building was recently renovated. Every room had a projector, a computer, internet, your own printer, sort of like unimaginable, like everything you'd ever want, externally everything you'd ever want. And yet, if you went into that school and you talked to the teachers, many of them were really stressed out, and some of them even burnt out. So there's something more that teachers need to really provide the type of education and the type of care that kids need to really flourish, other than just external things. And I don't want to downplay the significance of those things because they're really important. They're integral, but it's just not enough. So the work that we're doing is looking at what are these other things that teachers need to teach well, that students need to really learn and develop well, and how can we develop them? If they're skills, how can we cultivate them? So we use this word a lot, so it's worth sort of upfront defining it. So well-being, this is the WHO's definition, a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This is my personal favorite, an abiding sense of okayness. So, really, well-being is just being okay with whatever's happening. So again, this is the difference between relying on the external and having within you the capacity to really manage whatever is coming up in your experience in a way that allows you to still be okay even when it's difficult. So it's colloquial, but I really like this definition of well-being. So when we talk about well-being skills in the context of the center, they're really, sometimes Richie sort of expanded this now to 8, but I'm going to keep it concise and just talk about 4 sort of constituents or well-being skills that are really have emerged out of research that the center has done and also other scientists have done. And the first one is experiencing positive emotion. The second, PowerPoint is, it's messing with our slides. The second is recovering quickly, or people often call this resilience. The third is being present. And the fourth is caring for others. So I'm just going to go very quickly through like a snippet of the research that supports these 4 constituents. So experiencing positive emotions. The other part to this is also the ability to savor or really like sort of sustain a positive emotion. So this is a plot from a research study that was done by a graduate student here who's now a professor at University of Miami. And they did a task in the scanner where they showed different types of pictures, positive, negative, neutral pictures to people. And before they went in the scanner, they self-reported on their psychological well-being. And so what you see is that there's this correlation, quite strong relationship between their self-report of psychological well-being and the level of sustained activity in this part of the brain called the striatum, it's often called the reward center, but it's really important in motivation and reward learning, And so in this case, really in sustaining a positive emotion. So this is the brain response in positive versus negative pictures. So we can also think about this in the context of psychopathology like depression, where one of the hallmark symptoms is it's not just always feeling bad, it's also really an inability to feel positive things, to be motivated to go do sort of daily things in your life. So second one is resilience. So here we have a hypothetical person A and person B, and we can imagine on the x-axis here is time. So we can imagine at time one, there's some provocation. You get into a fight with your spouse. You have in the context of a teacher, you have a difficult interaction with a student or another teacher, a colleague at work, something really you almost get in a car accident, something really stressful happens. So the system's provocated and you see this big reactions, emotion, stress, etc. The stress response fires off. But you can see that they diverge not in the reactivity, but in the recovery phase. So person B very quickly comes back to baseline. So they sort of get the elevated stress response. That's a natural response to a threat to the system, and then they recover. Person A, however, sort of stays prolonged in this heightened level of stress. And so this is sort of a recovery slope of someone who's under chronic stress. One variant of PTSD looks a lot like this. And what it means, sort of simply put, is that your system, the body and the brain, are really just being saturated in stress hormones and other things that can have a really negative impact on cognitive functioning, on mental health, on physical health, on your physiology. So this ability to recover and recover quickly is one of these constituents of well-being. And I just bring your attention to one more thing because it's really important. They both react. So sometimes we talk about contemplative practice, mindfulness meditation, and we think like, just zenned out all the time. Nothing can faze me, right? This is sort of the media's presentation. It turns out that type of really blunted reaction is actually really bad. That's a second variant of PTSD. Some people with PTSD show this type of symptomatology. So, the way I like to look at it is we're human beings. We're meant to experience the whole range of emotions. So when something threatening happens, we should respond. But we want to basically be able to recover quickly. So that's the second one. The third one is being present. So sometimes we feel like this, lots of stuff going on in our minds, really not living in the present moment. A really cool study was done now 6 or 7 years ago where they sent people text messages on their cell phones, and they just asked them a few simple questions. What are you doing right now? Are you paying attention to what you're doing right now? And then some questions about like what's your affect level? What's your emotional state? And what they found is a little bit maybe discouraging. 47% of the time, Americans are not paying attention to what they're doing. And it really doesn't matter what we're doing. So you might think, I'm at work, I'm doing some task I really don't like, I'm going to daydream. But when I'm, doing my hobby or whatever, didn't matter. Hobby, work, exercise, whatever, people are half the time not paying attention. So that in and of itself is a kind of striking finding. But when they asked people to respond on their emotional state, what they found is that people who were not paying attention to the present moment were less happy. People who paid attention to the present moment more were more happy. And people were more happy paying attention than other moments when they weren't paying attention. And this is true whether what you were thinking about is like a positive daydream, negative daydream, a neutral daydream. It turns out that if you're thinking about something positive, that's sort of the next best thing to being in the moment, but it's still not as good. So being present seems to be really important. And, in the context of schools, which is the topic of the work we're going to discuss tonight, being present is really central to learning. So if a kid is not present to the class, to the instruction, to whatever it is they're supposed to be doing, they're literally not learning. And in many cases, in particular with teacher instruction, if the kid isn't paying attention, they may never recoup that, right? Because class just keeps moving on. And so really being able to attend, just simply put, is really essential to everything we ask kids to do. So this is sort of a short, funny video about why paying attention or not paying attention is not so good. So this is a commercial for coffee. I was just recently told it's Norwegian. But yeah, I mean, in some ways, this is kind of what mindfulness is all about, right? Like, it was never going to be fun going out to de-ice the car. And probably he was never going to want to do it. But if he had just attended to it in the present moment, when he was done, he would have been done, right? But in fact, he wasn't paying attention, and so he actually cleans off the car in front of him and compounds all of the sort of negativity around having to do this. So the fourth constituent of well-being is caring for others. There is a series of studies that have been done out of Harvard. This one is with children, and so what they do is they bring a child into the lab, and they show the child a doll, a monkey in this case, and then there's also an experimenter who's participating, and then the child, the doll, and the experimenter are each given cookies, and then the child is able to give the experimenter's cookies to the monkey, and then the child is also able to give his or her cookies to the monkey. And I don't exactly know how it's set up, but there are a couple of observers who are not participating who are rating the child on their level of sort of happiness and enjoyment. And so what they find is really kind of heartwarming, but the child gets a big boost when they meet the puppet. They get a boost, but not a huge one when they receive their own treats. They like giving the experimenter's treats to the puppet, but what they like most is giving their own treat to the puppet. So there's some sort of natural capacity to enjoy giving to others, right? And this type of research has been replicated many times with adults. So the basic paradigm is you come into the lab and half of the people get a condition where the experimenters say, you come into the lab in the morning, here's $100. There's two conditions. The first one is you have to spend it all on you have to spend it all. And the second condition is you have to only buy stuff for yourself. And then in the other condition, people come in, they get $100. First condition is you have to spend it all. Second condition is you have to spend all of it on somebody else. They come back at the end of the day and report on their affect and quality of day. And all of these studies show that the people who have been instructed to spend money on other people are happier, report more happiness, more satisfaction, more well-being. So, I mean, there seems to be something about giving where we're actually receiving. So these four make up this sort of short form constituents of well-being that form the sort of foundation for the type of research that we're doing at the center. So just to tie this back directly to teaching and education, so teaching is really all about relationship. If you ask anyone who's taught, they'll tell you that it really is about the quality of the relationship. And this is really starting to be borne out in research where we're finding that the quality of the teacher-student relationship, the degree of warmth and comfort and support is maybe the strongest predictor of student achievement. It's a stronger predictor than the quality of the teacher's education. So like the sort of how well-known or highly rated their university is. It's a better predictor of student achievement than a teacher having a master's degree or knowing a lot of their content area. It's a better predictor of student achievement than even the type of teacher certification that the teacher received. So it's actually even sometimes a better predictor of student achievement than the student achievement in the prior year. So there's something about the quality of the relationship that can really generate learning. And so, a question in this work and the type of work that we're doing is how do you develop teachers that can develop and sustain this type of relationship with their students? It's not an easy thing to do. Teaching's really difficult. It's really stressful. There's many, many demands and many, many challenges, and you don't ever get a break. You have to go in for 180 days. It's not like you're tired and you can take a break or come back, or even, you're having a really difficult day. You can't just walk out of the classroom when you're feeling that way. You have to manage it now. So how can we develop the capacities that allow teachers to develop these types of relationships? So, and then at the student level, and I sort of touched on this earlier, but when we think about learning, there's some really basic capacities that kids need to learn, like the ability to pay attention, to inhibit distraction, right? To focus attention on what they want, to shift attention from one thing to another when a task demands a shift in attention. And then there's the whole sort of social emotional realm of being able to interact well with other kids, to collaborate, to communicate. So there's all these really basic skills that students need. So another question of the work we're doing is, well, first, can we identify those skills? And second, can we cultivate them through the types of contemplative practices that we often use in interventions like mindfulness and kindness? And so back to the teacher. So what we have in the teacher education literature are really good descriptions of the type of behaviors that are effective. So effective teaching behaviors look like, good classroom management looks like, good instructional pacing looks like. And these are really important developments. The problem, though, is that there's this huge leap that we're making, which is if we just tell teachers what it looks like to be a good teacher, they're going to go and be able to be a good teacher. And the data says that just isn't the case. That if you look at new teachers in particular, but this is true across teaching in general, new teachers struggle, and what they struggle most on is classroom management. So the very part that feeds into this teacher-student relationship dynamic is the part that's most difficult. And I mean, I don't think that's surprising. It is difficult. And we wouldn't, tell somebody, okay, you're going to jump out of the plane and you're going to put your arms like this and you're going to stay in your stomach. And then when your, altimeter reads 5,000 feet, you're going to pull the cord and we wouldn't tell them to do that and then push them out of a plane, right? We would have them go with a guide and they'd get some experience and they do little jumps on their own and they develop all of the sort of basic skills and capacities that they need to actually then do the real jump. So what we can call these types of behaviors is interpersonal skills. So one of the models that we're working on is that interpersonal skills are sort of a second step, and that what we first have to develop is what we're phrasing intrapersonal skills. So the types of skills and capacities that exist within the mind. So things like attention, self-regulation, kindness, perspective taking, empathy, all the sort of base capacities that allow a teacher to develop the types of relationships that are so important. And so, these interpersonal skills are interacting with our internal narratives, our thoughts, our stories about ourselves, our stories about our students, our emotions, our sensory experience. And again, this is why we think things like mindfulness may be so useful, because it's really a training in how to work with, become aware of, and then work with in a useful way all of these dimensions of our experience. So there's been some research with students. This is just intervening with students. This is a pretty sort of mindfulness light curriculum that's very quick. And yet these researchers found lots of positive effects. So everything in black is the mindfulness intervention, gray is a control. And what you can see, they all went in opposite directions. This one is depressive symptomatology, so you want the mindfulness group to go down. And this is really a short intervention. There's been studies with teachers as well, where they just intervene with the teachers. And what I like about this one is this is called a mediation effect. So what it looks like at first is getting put in the mindfulness condition predicts less occupational stress, which is sort of what we would immediately think. It turns out, though, that there's this variable that this effect runs through, which is the development of mindfulness. So the real effect is that teachers go through the mindfulness condition, they develop mindfulness, and through developing mindfulness, they reduce occupational stress. And the same thing is true on the bottom, except with occupational burnout. So there is evidence at both the teacher and the student level that these types of interventions do have have the type of effects we're hoping that they have. One of the studies that we're running right now that I think other people will talk more about, the DOE study, Department of Education, we call it DOE for short. The real name is a classroom-based training program of attention and emotion regulation. This is why we call it the DOE study. So in this study, we're intervening with both teachers and students. So in the fall, we recruit a bunch of fifth grade teachers and randomize them to either a mindfulness-based training or a control condition. And we test them before and after intervention. And then in the spring, we recruit their students. So the students in the classrooms of the teachers who receive mindfulness-based instruction are recruited into the study. And in the spring, they receive a mindfulness curriculum for fifth graders that is sort of co-taught by their teacher and our outreach specialists like Lori and Lisa. And then in the other condition, we also recruit the students, but they don't receive training. And then we compare them, and we're just doing sort of the first round of analyses on these data. And one of the things that we're finding that I think is really interesting, because it speaks to this sort of the development of this interpersonal dynamic, is teachers who have received mindfulness training rate their students as showing more emotional management and more prosociality. And students in those teachers' classrooms rate their classrooms as being more equitable and more supportive. So the student perspective of the classroom is that it's more supportive and more equitable. The teacher perspective of the students in that classroom is they're demonstrating more emotion regulation and more prosociality. So there's this sort of this convergence of perspectives. And I think that's pointing to this thing of sort of teacher-student relationship quality that's so important. So we actually have direct data on that. We just haven't analyzed it yet. And that, I believe, is it for me.
So there may be many questions in your mind after listening to Matt speak. And just to let you know, we will have time for some questions and answers after we've all had a chance to share our information with you. So if you can, hold on to those questions, and we'll come back to them in a little bit. So again, I'd like to also thank you all for being here tonight and for your interest in the work of our team. My name's Lisa Thomas Prince, and I am an outreach specialist. I'm one of the teachers on our education team. And I'm here representing our teacher team. I've listed us all up there, Lori Gustafson, who you met earlier, and Chad McGeehee. Really, the work that we do is the result of a really, really strong collaboration. I'm just here as the representative tonight and wanted to bring them both up here onto the screen with me because couldn't do the work that we're doing without our entire team. So the three of us have had experience working as classroom teachers in various capacities. For myself, I was a world language teacher in public schools, both on the East Coast and here in Madison as well, for about 12 years altogether. And I had a personal practice of yoga for many years and mindfulness meditation as well, that I was developing over time, that supported me not only in my work, but also as a spouse, over time as a mother, was really something that I was developing for myself. And about 5 years ago, I had the opportunity to bring both my teaching experience as well as my personal mindfulness practice together in this work that's being done at the Center for Healthy Minds. And I think a similar example would be the case for Lori and Chad also, who have had many years of their own personal experiences of developing contemplative practice through meditation. And they bring that to their work as teachers and now to the work that we do together at the center. The funny thing for me is no matter how long I keep practicing mindfulness, at one point I thought, like, if I just keep practicing, I won't be nervous in speaking in front of public audiences like this. And I've come to learn that it doesn't go away. I can just be more aware of it. And sometimes just in naming it helps me to just relax around it a little bit. So I just had to put that out there. Thank you. So I'm here to share with you the work that our team has been doing, and Matt has talked a little bit about the research in general, and I want to talk about our specific projects. So when I was first brought on at the center about 5 years ago, it was to work on the project you may have heard of called the Kindness Curriculum. So the curriculum was developed at the center by one of our colleagues who has since retired. Her name is Laura Pinger. Laura collaborated with many people in and around Madison, as well as nationally, mindfulness teachers, to develop a curriculum specifically for young children ages 4 to 6. And the curriculum contained a series of 24 lessons that could be implemented in classrooms, and that brought in these skills that Matt touched on earlier, these 4 constituent areas. So developing a sense of being present, paying attention to our bodies, to through our sensory experiences, paying attention to what's happening for us now, with this sense of acceptance for what's happening, developing resiliency, and also this piece of caring for others, sharing compassion towards others. So the curriculum was offered in classrooms where classroom teachers also went through some training of their own. The results of that study were published in some articles written by the principal investigator, whose name is Lisa Fluke. And the early results of the study indicated benefits for both the teachers who did the training as well as for the students in the classroom. So for the teachers, the results showed that they felt more able to deal with classroom management issues, they were more efficacious in the classroom, and they experienced a decrease in symptoms of feeling stressed or feeling overwhelmed by what was happening. So there's some real benefit for the teachers who took part. Then for the students who took part in the series of 24 lessons, the initial results showed benefits in terms of this idea of switching or cognitive flexibility that Matt mentioned earlier. They showed increases in ability to regulate their emotions, and also increases in their social behaviors, pro-social behaviors in the classroom. What was interesting about the study is in the second year, when they added a later time follow-up, so after the kids had gone home and had summer vacation and came back into school in the fall the year after, they found that some of those increases were no longer evident. So what it really pointed to for us is the importance of having adults support in an ongoing way the learning that kids are doing. They definitely have the capacity to make the most of mindfulness practices in their lives. Kids do at many ages, even as young as 4 and 5. But they need adults around them who can support this, who can help them to develop what I like to refer to even as this language of emotional awareness. For me as a language teacher, it has been for me a process of developing kind of a new vocabulary. And so this, among other things, was one of the reasons that we piloted out also a mindfulness-based parenting program to help support this skill development for adults who can share the practices with kids. So the mindfulness-based parenting program is also a curriculum that was developed by our colleague Laura Pinger, and it was implemented with parents whose children are in Head Start and early Head Start programs in the Madison area. The data are still being analyzed by that project, and it's no longer, there are no new cohorts right now taking part in that study. But the work around sharing mindfulness practices with parents, we're hoping to see expand under the direction of one of the new faculty on campus who are collaborating with the center. Her name is Larissa Duncan, and she's in the School of Human Ecology. And she really brings a strong focus on this idea of working with parents to her work. So we're hoping to see these projects continue in different forms. I wanted to mention them because they really were the earlier wave of the work at the center. And like I said, with the publications around the kindness curriculum, we heard a lot about that. The kindness curriculum term itself kind of gets used frequently for all of the work of our education team. But it was a specific program for younger age students. So currently, the projects that we have ongoing, one of the main ones, and the one that reflects the video that you saw earlier and Matt referred to as the Department of Education project, has another name too. Actually has two other names. We call it Aware and Awake. And the Aware and Awake curriculum were developed by my colleagues, Lori and Chad, with collaboration from others. And these curriculum are for the 5th grade teachers and students. So to make sure I get it right, I want to check my notes. So AWARE is an acronym that stands for Abilities in Well-Being, Attention, and Resiliency in Education, and is a curriculum that's designed for teachers who receive the training in the fall, usually of an academic year. So at the beginning of our work with teachers in schools, the focus is on helping them to develop their own series of mindfulness or contemplative-based practices that serve them in developing resiliency in the challenges of their life in the classroom and as their life as human beings as well. We all have families and the whole realm of our lives that we carry with us every day when we come into the classroom. We can't forget all that other stuff that people are bringing with them into their roles as teachers. So we start there. It's really important to start there. And then after the teachers receive their training, we work with them to implement lessons in the classroom again, this time for 5th grade students. The student-directed curriculum is called AWAKE, and the acronym is Abilities in Well-Being, Attention, and Kindness in Education. And so what was really exciting, there's a lot of really exciting things, especially as you saw from the video, really exciting stuff that comes out of this work. Some exciting elements of this particular project is that it allowed the center to expand our work beyond the initial Madison-based school district. So we've expanded into some communities outside of Madison. The teacher training element of the program is being provided to teachers within their contract hours. So school administration is now providing support for expansion of this work and allowing teachers to do their training during their professional development time in the school day, which is a pretty big thing that the schools are supporting it to that degree. And this project added a component that wasn't present in the kindness curriculum study, which is this idea of ongoing support for teachers. So just like we didn't see the increases in emotion regulation and well-being in children continue over time without some ongoing support, the same really is the case for us as adults as well. Again, I refer back to like languages. When you're learning a language, right, if you don't use it, you kind of lose your ability to access it. Similarly, if we do a curriculum over 10 weeks with teachers and then we kind of step back and leave them on their own, they're not going to be able to maintain those practices if they're not having some support. So within this project, we've built some ongoing support and a modeling practice where our experienced teachers are co-teaching with classroom teachers over time, really with this goal of sustainability. I get excited just kind of talking about it. So I wanted to share some of the feedback that we've gotten from teachers who've taken part in this teacher training program so far. So one teacher says, I feel like this is something I will continue in my life. I can see a difference in school and out of school. I just feel I'm more patient with my students and with the other teachers too. I thought that was pretty good. So it's not just contained to the classroom where they're doing the practices with teachers. It's expanding. The ripples are expanding outward. And a teacher comments, I do feel with all the other stuff that we're given, the meetings, the paperwork, the changing of report cards, and the constant demands, it does affect how I present to the children. I think with mindfulness, I'm more hopeful in how I approach things. One of the other projects that we're working on right now is a project really that is the brainchild of Matt here and comes out of his own experience of working as a teacher in classrooms. And he wanted to focus on sharing these skills with teachers before they even receive their teaching certification and are thrown into the, all the busyness of first year of teaching. For those of you who've worked in the classroom, you know that first year of teaching is like nothing else. So we have a project now with the School of Education on campus where pre-service teachers are getting some training in contemplative practices aimed at well-being skills before they even are in their role as student teachers. So it comes in between their practicum and their student teaching portion of their teacher preparation program. And it's a curriculum that is provided in 9 sessions and builds in some of these same contemplative practices that we're doing in our other programs and expands those to incorporate even more. It's a collaboration, a strong collaboration with the School of Education, so they also are offering to us some time with the pre-service teachers during their seminar. So we're coming to the students at a time when they're already in class, which is also a big benefit. And it incorporates this idea of ongoing support. So they get the intervention, which takes place over 9 weeks, and then over the next semester, they're also receiving some booster sessions to reinforce those practices that they're learning and to provide some ongoing support. So to share some feedback also from these pre-service teachers who've been part of the projects, they point to the practices, helping them to be more aware of how the students' actions or behaviors show their needs, which enables them to be able to meet those needs within the classroom. And another student actually seeing how the practices they were learning in the lessons were actually coming into play when they were in practicum with students in the schools, and saying that they could notice when there's something going on with themselves that's making a difference in how they're interacting with kids, as opposed to just being affected by the classroom. So it's really pointing to this idea of teachers starting with the practices for the own teachers. And this is a quote from an educator and an author. Title of her book is Teach, Breathe, Learn. She states that she learned that her emotional state is transmitted to her students regardless of the lesson she's teaching. She says, I knew that a lesson absent of authentic, heartful interaction, however instructionally sound, would never create the connected, innovative, and loving classroom I had dreamed of. So this points too to that idea of relationship building that Matt mentioned earlier. So I wanted to highlight some of the lessons we've really learned over the time of, beginning with the kindness curriculum and making adjustments as we go through the projects at the center. We've kind of honed in right now, at least, on our model of training for teachers. And as we're doing with the AWARE curriculum, we start with instruction for teachers in developing skills for their own personal well-being. As a next step, we work with classroom teachers, co-teaching lessons with them, modeling lessons in the classroom, providing teachers time to just be observing what's happening and notice the changes in what happens during a lesson where teachers are sharing mindfulness with students as opposed to what happens during the course of a regular day. So all this while, teachers are also practicing, bringing practices into their own life. And after they've had that time to kind of marinate with these practices, then they begin learning strategies for sharing practices with students. And it's grounded in their own personal practice. And eventually they work to having teachers like we have with us here tonight who are incorporating mindfulness into their classroom, their daily life in the classroom. Not always as an explicit lesson. Sometimes it comes about in maybe the most normal of moments. Sometimes it comes about through transitions from one thing to the other. It organically becomes part of the life in the classroom. Isn't necessarily always a standalone activity. And in our work with students, we really work to help students develop this idea of focused and purposeful attention. To learn to pay attention